first time I started working in civil rights, I had this I had this leather jacket and my hair was down to here, and I was working with a stringer who was this guy who grew up in Old Miss, which was a very segregated, white university in Mississippi. And Life magazine got him to be my stringer. And I came to Jackson, Mississippi, looking like a real hippie. And he took one look at me and he pulled me into a barber shop and told the barber that I'd lost a bet to give me a marine haircut. And then he got me a red alligator shirt and white corduroy pants and a transistor radio case to put my camera in, and then he felt he could walk around with me. And, we were always, because I was Life magazine, we were always followed. There was something called the Sovereignty Committee, which just kept their eye on any reporters and all. And when the 3 civil rights workers at one point were disappeared, in the summer of '64, they organized a whole thing where students in the North and lawyers and all different people organized in Ohio. There was a training session to go into the South and to try to get voter registration, because that's the way they thought that they really could change the whole focus in the South in terms of voting, because blacks had very, very little voting rights, and for the most part were afraid almost to vote because of they were afraid of violence and things like that. And 3 civil rights workers disappeared, and I was driving with my stringer, and we were near this town called Philadelphia, Mississippi. We were looking at a burnt-out church, and then we heard that the workers had disappeared, and they had been in Philadelphia, Mississippi. We went there, and I started taking pictures of this big, burly sheriff, who's standing there in the town square. And I'm taking this picture, and so he comes up to me, and he takes the camera out of my hand, opens the back, takes the film, pulls it out, throws it on the ground, hands me back my camera. I didn't know how lucky I was. He was one of the ringleaders in the murder of these 3 civil rights workers. The fact that I was Life magazine probably was the reason that, that we didn't have any serious trouble in terms of ourselves. This was at the start of the Selma March, and this was King during the march, and with Coretta Scott King. And what I noticed with Martin Luther King, who really had this incredible way of speaking, this incredible way of talking to people, which just raised everyone's spirits. And, he was a great leader, a great spokesman for nonviolence. And, to hear him speak was just a wonderful thing. And at the same time, when I was putting this book together, I started looking at the contact sheets, and I noticed that there was something in his eyes in which, I wouldn't say that it was fear or anything like that, but there was a forbearance. And the fact that there were so many death threats upon him was something that really weighed upon him, or made him, even though he really didn't want to admit or sense it, it was something he was aware of. And I noticed in every picture there was a sense in his eyes, looking through the crowd and just wondering. But these were pictures taken during the Selma March, which was really a turning point in civil rights in the United States. And this is Rosa Parks there. And at her feet, again, is like a little banner which says "Freedom Now," with something on the ground. And again, in terms of a picture, that adds to a picture. Again, I was saying before, if you just do a portrait, it's okay, and it can be great, but sometimes you learn more about a person's situation in their times, and in what they were up to by the other elements in the picture. What happened here, and I only learned about this later, was that because there were so many death threats on Martin Luther King, the Selma March went from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. And this was a group that was just approaching Montgomery, Alabama. And you notice everyone's wearing the same kind of suit. And what it is Andrew Young, who is one of the leaders, one of the assistants to King, felt that probably there was going to be some sniper who was going to try to shoot King. And what he decided was that he would get as many people who looked similar to be in the front line so that the sniper wouldn't quite recognize which was King. And so many celebrities and many dignitaries were put off because they weren't put in the front line. But the reason these people were in the front line was almost as a protection for King. And this was just the crowds watching the Selma March. And this is just, you know, the boy with vote on his head was one of the marches in the Selma March. And for me, it epitomized the whole spirit of the civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King was killed, I was in New York, and Life magazine had me fly when he was shot. We didn't know he was killed at the time, but Life magazine had me fly to Memphis. And the first thing is, I went into the boarding house where the shot had been fired, which was from a second floor bathroom. And the assailant apparently stood in the bathtub and leveled his gun on the rim of the window. And I noticed this handprint on the wall, which could only have been made by someone standing in the bathtub. And I photographed it, and actually Life ran a full-page picture of that handprint the next week. But I was always impressed with that. You know, it symbolized something to me that was involved with terror, and involved with the whole threat in terms of what was going on at the time. I went to Martin Luther King's motel room, which was across the street, knocked on the door, and Hosea Williams, who was one of Martin Luther King's aides, let me in. And I noticed his attaché case was on his ledge, and around it were sort of dirty shirts and old styrofoam cups. There's a book actually in there which I had done the cover of, which was a picture of the Selma March. It was one of his books. And on the television screen above, suddenly this image of King came on behind this commentator. And so I photographed all of these elements just in one picture. And for me, it symbolized the fact that the physical man had gone forever. His material things were left behind, but that his spirit still stayed with us.